Chapter 11. Wonders of the Heavens. Ye stars, bright legion that, before all time, camped on plain of sapphire, what shall tell your burning myriads, but the eye of him who bade through heavens your golden chariots wheel? The stars, Crawley. We were aroused by the voice of Asterion. Awake, arise, behold the glories of the starry universe. Have we traversed the great ethereal envelope? Asked the prince as we sprang from the cots. Long ago. We are now 250,000 miles above the earth and floating in the vast luminiferous ether which fills all space, and in which the stars, suns, and planets roll as in the boundless infinite ocean. Asterion withdrew the screens. We sprang to the windows, speechless with inexpressible wonder. The heavens were one universal blaze of glory. From heights immeasurable, from depths unfathomable, gleamed millions of stars. The stars in the constellations Perseus, Southern Cross, and Centauri, to observers on the earth, have been compared to thousands of jewels strewn on the ground of black velvet. But here the whole measureless expanse seemed powdered with precious gems. There were great diamond, ruby, emerald, amethyst, sapphire, and crystallized suns. Countless stars and clusters unknown on earth now sprang into view, galaxies before whose mighty splendors even Sirius, Arcturus, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, and Hades paled their ineffectual fires, now gleamed before us, and giant nebulae, in comparison with which Orion, Argus, Lyra, and Andromeda seemed like faint misty vapors, now hung their vast and gorgeous curtains, half concealing, half disclosing still greater glories beyond, while the Milky Way, that broad and ample road, whose dust is gold and pavement stars, spread its mighty arc over all. It almost seemed as if the gates of paradise had opened to disclose the infinite splendors of deity, and the grand words of the psalmist came to mind. The heaven declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Look at the planets, the worlds we inhabit, and whose magnificence we expiate so much upon, said Asterion. They present rather an insignificant appearance. Sir Edmund Burke says, there is but one step from the sublime to the ridiculous, and never was the aphorism so strikingly illustrated as now. Here we were, the members of our wonderful and beautiful planetary system, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, etc., looking like little black insects slowly creeping around their orbits. What feeble reflected light they could boast of, absolutely turned to darkness in the surrounding effulgence, like the light of a candle held up to the sun. We mortals have little to boast of in our earthly habitation, said Asterion. Through the window under the battery room we saw the earth 250,000 miles below. Its shape was like the half moon, although many times larger. On the illuminated eastern hemisphere we could see the Antarctic continent and oceans, part of the South Pacific and Atlantic oceans, and the southern portions of Africa and Australia. The western hemisphere was in darkness. The spirit thermometer hanging outside was frozen solid long ago. I wonder how cold it is outside, asked Altiphora. So cold, I fancy, a piece of ice would feel like a coal of fire beside it, replied the doctor. Place the phrygometer out on the shady side, said Asterion. Vidian placed a peculiar-looking instrument outside one of the windows. It registered what would have been equivalent of 300 degrees below zero of centigrade. Place the calometer out on the sunny side. Vidian did so. In a few moments it ran up to 500 degrees, which shows the enormous power of the sun's direct rays, said Asterion. The moon must be more than twice as hot as boiling water, remarked Altiphora. On the sunny side, for half of the month only. During the other half, she has a chance to cool off. What protects our car against these violent alternations of cold and heat? I asked. Its brilliant surface reflects the solar rays like a mirror. Its walls are absolutely non-conducting and do not permit the escape of warmth inside. What protects our planets from this terrible heat? Asked Altiphora. Our astronomers say that their atmospheres perform this office, I replied. Only partially, said Asterion. The outer gaseous envelope, whose depth equals the diameter of the planet, strikes down or absorbs about 75% of the hot rays. The atmospheric vapor absorbs a great portion of the remainder, allowing merely enough to reach the terrestrial surface for the necessary purposes. What if some stray comet should happen to come along and brush away the envelope with its tail? All animal and vegetable life would speedily die under the intense heat of the sun's rays. What if the comma should completely surround the planet or come in contact with its atmosphere? Asked Altiphora. The whole surface of the planet would be enveloped in flames. How can that be? I said. Many years ago, the comma of a large comet became entangled amongst the moons of Jupiter and remained there for 4 months without producing any perceptible effect on them. Jupiter's moons have no atmosphere, and consequently no perceptible effect would be produced, Asterion replied. The commas of many of the comets are composed, in addition to fine meteoric matter, of hydrogen gas and certain components of carbon, which, as you know, are highly combustible. Now, if the comma of one of these comets should happen to surround one of the planets, the Earth, for instance, the hydrogen would at once unite with the oxygen of the atmosphere, for which it has a powerful affinity, and take fire. This would immediately ignite the carbon, and the planet would be wrapped in flames. At these words, the prediction of the apostle came to mind. But the day of the Lord shall come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. As this in planetary space is practically a vacuum, said I, the outpressure of the air in this car must be enormous. Amounting to several thousand pounds to the square foot, replied Asterion. And if it should happen to burst open, what would the consequences be to us? Asterion took one of the penguins from the basket and, carefully opening one of the double windows, placed the bird outside. It instantly burst into atoms, flesh, feathers, bones, all, as if blown up with dynamite. The instantaneous disappearance of the unfortunate penguin sufficiently illustrated what our fate would be. Have no apprehensions of our car bursting, said he. It can sustain a 10-fold greater outpressure than this. John fed the polar birds from a hamper of fish caught on the island, and they took a hearty meal in which the Commodore, who appeared to have taken quite a fatherly interest in them, condescended to join, at the same time teaching them a few lessons in table etiquette. Asterion renovated the air from the generator. Burras put the batteries to higher tension, and the car flew onwards at a rate of 200,000 miles per hour, 3 times the velocity of the Earth in her orbit around the sun. I now inquired what was the object of the Martians in visiting Earth. We have known for a long time past, by our telescopic observations, that your Earth was inhabited, and we very naturally desired to ascertain something about you, replied the doctor. We terrestrials have supposed our Earth to be the only inhabited planet in the solar system, said I. Which brings to mind the fable of the caterpillars in the gooseberry bush, who believe their own bush to be the only inhabited one in the garden, replied he. Our astronomers have recently discovered in your planet certain features somewhat resembling our own. Some of our people have been willing to accept the idea that your planet might possibly be the abode of life, although not under the same conditions as exist on Earth. What kind of life have you terrestrians imagined our planets to contain? Some of our novelists and romancers of the sensational, fanciful schools have taken that subject in hand and peopled your world with all sorts and varieties of fantastical beings, human, animal, and vegetable. I then briefly described a few of their extraordinary and whimsical conceptions and monstrous absurdities, which would almost make Captain Gulliver and Baron Munchausen jump out of their graves with amazement. Your terrestrial romances are gifted with wonderful imaginations, and we Martians should feel highly complimented at their picture of our world and society. Some of our people, in consequence of certain peculiar appearances seen on your planet, have thought it might be inhabited by intelligent beings like ours, and that they were trying to communicate with us by some kind of signals, and a few of our astronomical enthusiasts have suggested that our governments undertake the great labor and expense of replying by displaying huge letters or geographical figures by means of electric lights covering many hundreds of square miles of territory. It would be impossible for either of us to interpret each other's signals, and I doubt whether they could have even been distinguished, for we can only see the bright side of each other's planet, and any such signals would be swallowed up by the powerful solar reflection. Whatever unusual appearances your astronomers may have seen are wholly natural. Now, as to our object in visiting your Earth, being convinced that it was inhabited and having made great advancements in interplanetary navigation, we decided to pay you a visit, and made our first many years ago. But we found it impossible to land anywhere on your globe except at the poles, where the cosmomagnetic currents are centered. A few journeys were made, which were accomplished with great danger, and several of our navigators lost their lives. Some landed on your North Pole during your Arctic winter, and in response to the cold weather, your planet is quite ahead of ours. Your freezing winds and terrible tempests drove us away. Asterion is the only one who has succeeded in accomplishing safe transit. He has made several journeys and landed on your South Pole, where the cosmic currents are more powerful and uniform than at the North Pole. These trips were made during your Antarctic summer. He brought over his workmen, engineers, machinery, etc., built the houses and workshops out of your polar rocks. He transported the fireship and vessels in which you crossed the polar sea. This required a small fleet of ether volts. He has now made your South Pole the base for future operations. He is investigating the electric and magnetic forces of your Earth, its atmosphere, etc., which in many respects are so different from ours. Soon as the necessary arrangements are completed, he will bring over a few of our airships in order that we may make aerial voyages over your globe and visit your different countries. How will your people receive us? I cannot answer for other countries, I replied, but I assure you that the people of the United States of America, who are the most open-hearted and generous as well as the most powerful and progressive nation of our globe, will receive you most kindly and extend to you those courteous hospitalities for which they are renowned amongst the nations and kingdoms of the earth. We are indeed truly delighted to hear that, said the prince. There's my hand on it, said I, and promise me that your first visit shall be to our great and glorious republic of which I am proud to be a humble representative. We shall certainly make our first visit there, he replied. And may that happy day come soon, said Asterion with enthusiasm, when Earth and Mars shall join hands in friendship and cement their bonds of brotherly union across the planetary spheres. By evening we had made 2,000,000 miles. We took supper and retired for the night, Hvns and Wndrs taking turns at the machinery. Next morning, Asterion informed us that we were 5,000,000 miles from Earth and were rounding the great elliptic curve in the direction of Mars at the rate of 6,000 miles per minute, the Earth's attraction continually diminishing in direct proportion with our flight from it. Day after day passed on as our car, impelled by the mighty cosmic currents, sped her swift flight through the measureless realms of space. New stars, constellations, and galaxies unknown and undreamt of on Earth rose around us on every hand. We felt almost overwhelmed and crushed amid these awful infinitudes. Human reason and sense could no longer endure these never-ending grandeurs and glories of deity, in the presence of which poor finite man is but a worm of dust. We were compelled to screen the windows and seek relief in the contemplation of our own infinite littleness. We are now approaching that point where the cosmomagnetic stream running between Jupiter and Venus crosses our planet pathway to Mars, said Asterion. Jupiter lies to the west about 475 million miles from the Sun. The orbit of Venus, being within our own, lies only about 30 million miles distance on the east. How would you like to take a look at her? We all eagerly assented. All right. When we reach that point, I will change the magnetism of our car and batteries to correspond to the magnetism of the stream running between those planets. We will take that stream and reach Venus within 3 days. We will return by the same current till we reach the intersection again, then change our magnetism to the Martian and continue on our journey. In a few hours the cross stream was reached. Asterion charged the batteries with a Venusian magnetism. Our car turned to the east, flew with increasing speed along this new current, and on the morning of the third day we came within 500,000 miles of the planet, which was revolving at a mean distance of about 67 million miles from the sun.